Hello children and welcome to Study with Sudhir, your digital classroom. And this is where you get to learn all the ICSE class 9 and 10 English poems and short stories. In fact, we have covered most of the syllabus and I do hope that you have subscribed to the channel because that's when you will get the notifications for the important videos that we post, because from now onwards we will be discussing specific questions and answers and to give you tips on how to crack the English exam very well in both class 9 and 10 board exams. So do so pronto, subscribe to the channel and also press on the bell icon. Today we are going to be studying the Blue Bead by Norah Burke. This is part of the class 10 English syllabus of the ICSE stream. Norah Burke, just to give you a sense of what kind of an author Norah Burke was, she was a well-known English novelist and non-fiction writer, famous for her descriptions of life in India. So this is a story which has been set in India, and I can tell you one small tip. There is a very good chance that a question from the Blue Bead will come as part of the ICSE class 10 board exam. Remember, last year it was Ruskin Bond, another story based in Shimla in India which came. So there is a very good chance R.K. Narayan or the Blue Bead. So these two chapters you should do very well. And in fact, R.K. Narayan we have done in 3 parts, in 3 different videos, part 1, part 2 and part 3. So do ensure that you go through all the 3 videos in order to understand A Horse and Two Goats very well. So let's come back to the Blue Bead. Norah Burke's father was a forest officer in India, and that's how she gets to know very intimately the kind of life that was there in the forest, and that's what we learn in this story, the manner in which in such great and vivid detail she has managed to explain and picture an entire story of life inside the forest, and that's what is really the beauty of the story. Many people actually, and this is what a common feedback I have received from students, including my daughter who I taught last year, is that the story is too long and there is too much of description to learn. So it's not a story which one enjoys, but if when you learn the story as we would do so now, line by line, you will realize what a fascinating story it is. It's an absolutely lovable story in which we fall in love with that little girl called Sibia, all of just 12 years old, and what she does as part of her daily routine inside the forest. So sit back, enjoy the story as I say to you on the flights, and then we will get to know the intricacies which the author has actually managed to bring out in this very fascinating story of life inside the forest. So the 2 principal characters of this story are Sibia, who I just mentioned, the 12-year-old girl, and a crocodile. So it's a story of animal and man conflict. It's a story of nature. There is a theme of poverty which has been discussed. It's also the story of a child's courage and at the same time a child's innocence. And of course the larger theme also about the kind of hard work that the women inside that forest area have to put in on a daily basis. So lots of themes interwoven into this very fascinating story of a conflict, of a fight that takes place between Sibia and a crocodile. So enjoy the story and let's start. I hope you have your book in front of you. I hope you have a pencil and pen and a notebook in which to take your notes. We'll be doing this story in 2 parts because I don't want it to be one longish 1 hour 15-minute long video. So we'll split it in 2 parts so that it will make it easy for you. You can take a break and then go to part 2. So in part 1, let's start right away. From deep water came the crocodile. So crocodile is the main protagonist. It's the crocodile which is introduced by Norah Burke right up front. From the deep water came the crocodile. Out of black water, curved with whirlpools. What is a whirlpool? Whirlpool is something which kind of, very fast revolving water which kind of keeps going, almost taking people inside it, any kind of material. And into the frill of gold shadows by the stepping stone. Just look at the beauty of the language which the author has used. Deep water, black water. He was twice the length of a tall man. A tall man would be normally about 6 feet tall. Now this crocodile, the author says, was twice the length of a tall man. So he would be close to about 12 feet in length. And inside him, among the stones which he had swallowed, to aid digestion, rolled a silver bracelet. So among the various things that the crocodile had eaten, we would be told later on in the story about the kind of things that the crocodile eats, it had also swallowed a silver bracelet. And the author says that the stones is what the crocodile is eating in order to aid and help him in digestion. Timber was being floated down this great Indian river. So it's a river in the most likely in the Himalayan plains. So we could be well talking about the Ganga, though it does not mention it by name, or it could be any tributary of the Ganges. With forests further up, and there were sleepers lying stuck around the stones until someone came to dislodge them. So it is almost being used like a waterway. Waterway is something which you have learnt in geography. Waterway, the timber just floats down the river, the natural stream of the river. So the timber is floated and it can be collected by someone downstream. And whenever it got stuck somewhere, there would be somebody coming to dislodge it so that it can go along with the natural stream of the river and send them on their way, or until floods lifted them and jostled them along, or until there was a flood in the river, in which case again the timber would float along with the natural drift of the flooded river. The crocodile had no need to hide himself. He came to rest in the glassy shallows. In the glassy shallows. Now, shallow is something which is not very deep. It's something which is very shallow. You can see through it it's a watery area which is almost like glass, which is what it says, glassy shallows. He came to rest in the glassy shallows among logs. So logs of wood, and there will be the crocodile almost camouflaging itself. Camouflaging itself means almost hiding itself. The color of the crocodile is generally dark grayish brownish kind of thing. The log of wood is also of the same color, grey brown. So it would be able to camouflage itself, not being seen by the people around. Perhaps because then it can take people by surprise. He came to rest in the glassy shallows among logs and balance there on tiptoe. Tiptoe is almost a very human way of walking, and the author is actually giving to the crocodile a human dimension by using the word tiptoe, as the crocodile is almost going to walk tiptoe so that it can have the element of surprise. Balance there on tiptoe on the rippled sand. Rippled as in when something is thrown into the water, a stone is thrown into the water, it will create ripple effect. So on the rippled sand is also like, there are almost like design kind of thing on the sand with only its raised eyes. Have you seen a crocodile's eyes? Big eyes, and it will be raising it out of the water and raised nostrils breathing the clean sunny air. So look at the kind of absolutely magnificent description that the author is able to give to you, that is talking of how the crocodile's life is as it rests itself among the between the logs, and also getting there and smelling the clean sunny air. Around him broad sparkling water travelled between cliffs and grass and forested hills. So it gives you a sense of a very clean and pristine kind of environment. A jungle track came out of scrub each side and down to the sun whitened stepping stones on which a little flycatcher was flirting and trilling along. Another human dimension. A flycatcher was flirting and trilling along, almost like, very playfully going from place to place. Now comes the description of the crocodile. The mugger crocodile, blackish brown above and yellowy white under, lay motionless, able to wait forever till food came. If you have seen the shots of the crocodiles in Discovery Channel or in National Geographic Channel, you will see the crocodiles are generally reptiles which kind of lie still in water with just the eyes popping out, because they like to camouflage themselves and have the element of surprise that suddenly when an animal who it wants to eat or attack, or a human being comes close, it can have the element of surprise and attack it. So they actually conceal themselves very well. In this particular case, the mugger, which essentially is the Hindi word magarmach for crocodile, which has been used here, the author is telling you the color of the skin, that it has a brown kind of a skin, blackish brown above and yellowy white under, and lay motionless. It also is, she also refers to it as an antediluvian saurian. Saurian essentially means a lizard kind of an animal. An antediluvian means old fashioned, because here in the very next phrase, she refers to it as this prehistoric juggernaut, ferocious and formidable. A vast force in the water, propelled by the unimaginable and irresistible power of the huge tail, lay wrapped by ripples, a throb in his throat. Look at the power of the language, appreciate the power of the language, and you also need to kind of look at the kind of phrases which have been used, underline them, because you'll do well when you write your answers and describe the crocodile. If you're able to use these exact phrases, that will impress the examiner that much more, because that will show that you are very, very familiar and thorough with this particular short story. So you need to talk about how ferocious and formidable as in a very formidable force, a very powerful force in the water, a vast force in the water, propelled by unimaginable and irresistible power of the huge tail, because along with the body, which the author has already told you is close to double the size of a tall man, that's almost 12 feet, the tail is also equally long. The tail actually gives it a huge force, especially while it is in the water. His mouth running almost the whole length of his head. If you see, the crocodile's mouth is the most prominent part. The tail and the mouth are the two most prominent parts of a crocodile's body. Was closed and fixed in that evil bony smile. Evil bony smile. Please underline that. And where the yellow underside came up to it, it was tinged with green. So he already describes it, the crocodile, as someone who is evil with an evil bony smile. So you get a fantastic description of the crocodile, how it looks, how it actually conceals itself in the water amidst the logs, and generally concealing itself just above the water, and the kind of body structure it has, how tall it is, with its tail making it a vast force and a formidable and a ferocious force in the water, and having a evil bony smile. From that day, from the day perhaps 100 years ago, when the sun had hatched him in a sandbank. Now, the author does not tell you how old the crocodile is, but he's giving you a very, very vague, kind of a very abstract sense of how old the crocodile may have been. It says perhaps 100 years ago. Perhaps 100 years ago, and crocodiles do live up to that big, a long age. When the sun had hatched him, because they are come from eggshells, he had broken his shell and got his head out and looked around, ready to snap at anything, even before he was fully hatched. So it also shows a very aggressive streak of this particular crocodile, which has an evil smile. That it was ready to snap and eat at anything, even before the body had actually come out completely out of the eggshell. Ready to fend for himself immediately, he had lived by his brainless craft and ferocity. It says that it was an extremely ferocious animal. Already we have been, the word ferocious and formidable have been used for the crocodile before, and he had managed to survive. He had managed to survive despite the fact that even when it was kind of young, it could actually be eaten by someone else. But the crocodile had managed to survive all these years, escaping the birds of prey and the great carnivorous fishes, because there are some fish which can actually even eat the small crocodiles or the gharials, the baby crocodiles. He had prospered, catching all the food he needed and storing it till putrid in holes. Putrid as in rotten. They got rotten in holes in the bank. So it would store the food in the in holes in the river bank, and it would eat it till they got completely rotten, as in putrid. Tepid water to live in, tepid as in lukewarm, neither very hot nor very cold, to live in, and plenty of rotted food grew him to his great length. So from that day, when he kind of just got out of the eggshell on the sandbank, he had grown to this huge reptile who actually survived and who was an extremely formidable and ferocious power in that river. Now nothing could pierce the inch thick armored hide. Now the hide as in the skin of the reptile, the crocodile, which was an inch thick. Not even rifle bullets. So just see how he's building up the formidable force of this crocodile. Not even rifle bullets, not even bullets which are shot could actually harm him, and they would just bounce off. Only the eyes, and now he's giving you the soft part. Now the author is giving you the soft part. Only the eyes and the soft underarms offered a place. He lived well in the river, sunning himself sometimes with other crocodiles, muggers, as well as the long-snouted fish-eating gharials. So these are the different kinds of reptiles of the crocodile family. Crocodiles, muggers, gharials. Gharials are have a longer snout. Muggers as well. On warm rocks and sandbanks where the sun dried the clay on them quite white, and where they could plop off into the water in a moment If alarmed, if there is something which will threaten them like a tiger or a lion, they would immediately plop into the water to save themselves. So these are the other kind of animals of the same reptile family who are also there. The big crocodile fed mostly on fish. One of the questions that could come is that what did the crocodile mostly feed on? What did it eat on? So you need to know the details. Just mark the keyword so that you will be able to remember it. On fish, but also on deer and monkeys that came to drink. Perhaps a duck or two. So fish, deer, monkeys, ducks. But sometimes here at the fort, he fed on a pie dog. Pie dogs are essentially, it's a slang for stray dogs, full of parasites, or a skeleton cow. So please remember all these things that the crocodile was used to eating. And sometimes he went down to the burning ghats and found the half-burnt bodies of Indians cast into the stream. So there were, along the Ganges is where a lot of this kind of the last rites are done. And that's where there are some bodies which are not fully burnt and they are thrown into the river. That also the crocodile used to devour. So from stray dogs to ducks to monkeys to fish to skeleton of cows to even half-burnt human bodies. All these were food for this particular crocodile. Beside him in the shoals, as he lay waiting, glimmered a blue gem. And now the author has introduced to you the title of the story, the Blue Bead, and she calls it a blue gem. So it has been introduced right here, given a long description of the crocodile, and now come to, because you must be wondering what is the meaning of this title, the Blue Bead, because it seems to be a story about the crocodile so far. It was not a gem, though it was sand-worn glass that had been rolling about in the river for a long time. So it was not a precious gem, but a glass which had been rolling around in the river. By chance it was perforated right through, so there was a hole through that particular gem. The neck of a bottle, perhaps a blue bead. So it was something which could actually be made part of a necklace, as we would see later on in the story. In the shrill noisy village above the fort, out of a mud house the same color as the ground, came a little girl. So we have been told about the crocodile, now we will be told about Sibia. Came a little girl, a thin, starveling child dressed in an earth-colored rag. She had torn the rag in two to make a skirt and a sari. So immediately we are told about how poor she was, what a poor background she came from, which is what I said, the theme of poverty, extremely important. So you need to make a note of these small points again to help your answer look better. Sibia was eating the last of her meal, and this is an important paragraph, so please do mark it. Sibia was eating the last of her meal, chapati, wrapped around a smear of green chili and rancid butter. Rancid essentially means butter which has been spoilt. And she divided this also to make it seem more, and bit it, showing straight white teeth. So two aspects here. One, she didn't have much to eat. So much so that she had to actually survive by eating butter which had been spoilt. Obviously, we do not do such things, but she had nothing else to survive on. So she was eating butter and chapati with green chili in order to survive. That's aspect number one. Aspect number two, what does she do to tell her own mind, to play mind games with her own mind, that she has a lot to eat? So she divides everything into two, the food into two, in order to make it appear that she has a lot to eat. That shows some kind of an innocence, some kind of wanting to make herself believe that she is well off, that she has enough to eat. So she is playing mind games with herself, Sibia. The third aspect here is that was eating the last of her meal, which means that she does not have, at least on that particular day, she doesn't have anything more to eat. With her ebony hair and great eyes and her skin of oiled brown cream, she was a happy, immature child woman. Why does the author describe her as a child woman? That's because she was wearing a skirt and a sari, again which has been torn, which has been made by cloth, which has been torn into two in order to facilitate that she can have the two garments. She was an happy, immature child woman about 12 years old. 12 years old, please mark the age. Barefoot, of course, and often goosey cold on a winter morning, and born to toil. Two things here, she is 12-year-old, while the crocodile, we have been told earlier, is almost 100 years old. Number two, Barefoot, of course, and barefoot again indicates poverty, no slippers, and often goosey cold on a winter morning, and born to toil. Born to toil, that is used to working very hard from a very young age. She's already 12 years old, but for many years she has been working very hard. Born to toil, as if that is what her fate is. In all her life, she had never owned anything but a rag. She had never owned even one anna, not a pie, even to buy, say, a handful of brown blown glass beads from that stall in the bazaar where they were piled like stars, or one of the thin glass bangles that the man kept on a stick, and you could choose which color you would have. So the theme of poverty further reinforced by telling you that she never owned anything more than the rag that she was wearing. She did not have even a single anna, not even a single paisa on her ever. And she could never afford to buy any of those colorful bangles that were there in the stall at the fair. She knew what finery was though. She had been with her parents and brothers all through the jungle to the little town at the railhead where there was this bazaar. So not that she was not familiar with what finery meant was. It's a different matter that she did not have the money to be able to afford all that. And she had walked through all the milling people and the dogs and the monkeys full of fleas and the idling, gossiping, bargaining humanity, spitting Beetlejuice, heard the bell of a sacred bull clonking as he lumped through the dust and the hubbub, as in the hustle bustle. So basically, the picture of a very hustling, bustling kind of a market fair being picturized by the author. She had paused amazed before the sweetmeat stall to gaze at the brilliant honey confections abuzz with dust and flies. They smelled wonderful above the smells of drains and humanity and cheap cigarettes. So she has the discerning nose to be able to smell which is bad smell, which is of cheap cigarettes and the smells of drains and humanity, and that of the honey confections which would be there in those sweetmeat stalls. At home, she sometimes tasted wild honey and crunched the syrup out of a stalk of sugar cane, but these sweets were green and magenta, that is those which were there at the confectionery stall. Then there was the cloth stall, stacked with great rolls of new cotton cloth, stamped at the edge with the maker's sign of a tiger's head, and smelling so wonderful of its dressing, straight from the mills, and Sibia could have stood by it all along. So basically, it's also, while the author is describing all this, it's also kind of giving you an idea about the kind of longing that Sibia has perhaps for all these things which are part of the market fair, which she could only observe, but she could never own or buy because she did not have a single anna on her. But it also gives you a sense of the expanse of the market which was there as part of this forest by the river where Sibia lived, as well as the crocodile. But there were other wonders to see: satin sewn with real silver thread, tin trays from Birmingham, and a sari which had got chips of looking glass embroidered into the border. She joined the crowd around a Kashmiri travelling merchant on his way to the bungalows. He was showing dawn-coloured silks that poured like cream, and he had got a little locked chest with turquoises and opals in it, again descriptive of the entire market area. Best of all, a box which when you pressed, a bell tinkled and a yellow woolen chicken jumped out, again to give you a sense of all the temptations which were there for Sibia, but something which she could simply not afford to buy. There was no end to the wonders of the world. So there was this world which was not within Sibia's reach at all, and that's what the author wants to convey, because she comes from someone so poor that she had to survive on rancid butter, tear her rag into two in order to make a skirt and a sari, and never owned anything but this rag and did not have even an anna on her. But Sibia in all her life from birth to death was marked for work. We have already been told that she was born to toil. Since she could toddle, she had husked corn, and this paragraph is important, so please mark it, and this much more important than the market fair description, because this gives you a sense of the protagonist of the story. Since she could toddle, she had husked corn and gathered sticks and put dung to dry and cooked and weeded and carried and fetched water and cut grass for water. So these kind of things, the kind of different jobs that she did, you need to remember, so because this can be a question that can be asked to you in the examination paper. She was going with her mother and some other women now to get paper grass from the cliffs above the river. When you had enough of it, you could take it down by bullock cart to the railhead and sell it to the agent who would arrange for its dispatch to the paper mills. The women often toiled all day at this work and the agent sat on silk cushions smoking a hookah. Now, this is important because it shows you the disparity of labor, that while the men sat and smoked a hookah, the women actually toiled all day long, and starting from 12-year-old Sibia to the older women who had to labor, while the men actually led a much more of an easy and luxurious life, and they had to cut paper grass from the cliffs above the river. Such thoughts did not trouble Sibia. However, as she skipped along with her sickle and homemade hay fork beside her mother. So the hay fork, please mark it because this is an important weapon and it will play an important role later on in the story. You could skip on the way out but not on the way back when you ached with tiredness and there was a great load of that paper grass to carry. Now, some of the women were wearing necklaces made out of lal beads, the shiny scarlet seeds, black one end, that grew everywhere in the villages, jungle. It was best to have new necklaces each year instead of last year's faded ones. So what they would do is to collect these kind of seeds, the scarlet seeds from the jungle, and use that to make some kind of an ornament around inside the necklace, and they would make those perforated holes and they would be able to string it along with their necklace, and this is what most of the women did. And they would ensure that they did that, had one new every year instead of the last year's faded ones, because obviously they would get faded with time. And Sibia was making one too. Now, this comes another important aspect which you need to remember. How nice it was going to be to hear that rattling swish around her neck. Rattling swish, the sound that it would make when she would walk around or run around as she froused along with lots of necklaces. Again, a sound which has been kind of described with this very interesting word called froused. But each seed, hard as stone, had to be drilled with a red hot needle, and the family needle was snapped, so she must wait till they could buy another. So basically saying that she's so poor that she cannot even afford to buy a needle. She did not have the money to buy even a needle, so the needle was broken, so she will have to wait till they could afford to buy another needle with which she could make a hole for one of those beads with which she could actually string together in her necklace. Oh, for strings and strings of glass and beads, anklets, earrings, nose rings, bangles, all the gorgeous gazelle of the bazaar, all her little golden body decorated. Now, she's a word has been used, golden body. We have already been told that she is a good looking a child woman, a happy child woman, and now we are being told that her body is almost like that of a golden color. Chattering as they went, the women followed the dusty track towards the river. On their way, they passed a Gujjar encampment of grass huts where these nomadic graziers would live for a time until their animals had perhaps finished all the easy grazing within reach. Encampment essentially is a settlement which has lots of cattle, goats, cows, buffaloes, etc. And Gujjar is again a community of tribals, a nomadic settlement, because they kind of camp at one place, take care of whatever agriculture they do out there, and when that resources in that area would get over, they would move to another area. They would clear a bit of a forest area and start livelihood out there. Basically indulge in dairy farming and also a bit of agriculture and horticulture. So again, the author is giving you a sense of the kind of life in this forest area by the river. On their way, they passed a Gujjar encampment of grass huts where these nomadic graziers would live for a time until their animals had perhaps finished all the easy grazing within reach, or they were not able to sell enough of their white butter and white milk in the district. So, they basically living off dairy, they would take care of their goats and cows and buffaloes and sell that in order to make a livelihood. Or there was no one to buy the young male buffaloes for tiger bait. So they would also sell some of their buffaloes in order to bait the tiger. So there are different ways in which they were using their cows, buffaloes and goats and sheep. Or perhaps a cattle killing tiger was making a nuisance of himself. Then they would move on. Another reason they would move on is when a a tiger would actually come into their settlements and eat and attack any of their cattle, then they would realize that it was time to move on. So what Norah Burke is actually giving you a sense of the life inside a jungle. That's extremely important as part of the story, The Blue Bead, because it gives you a sense of the kind of risks that many of these Gujjar settlements faced, that while they lived off their cows and buffaloes and goats, they also had to be very careful, because if a tiger entered their settlement and took away their cattle, they would realize that it was risky to live there, and they would realize that it was time to move on. Sibia glanced at the Gujjar woman as they went past. They wore trousers tight and wrinkled at the ankles, and in their ears large silver rings made out of melted rupees, and on one of them was clinging a stick against the big brass gurras in which they fetched water from the river for the camp, to see which ones were empty. So again, now she's giving you a sense of the kind of ornaments that this Gujjar women essentially wore, and they would actually, the melted rupee coins would make part of their earrings. The men and boys were out of camp just now with the herd or gone to the bazaar to sell produce, but one or two buffaloes were standing about, creatures of great wet noses and moving jaws and gaunt black bones. So again, giving you a very beautiful sense of life in one of these Gujjar tribal settlements. The Gujjars were junglis. Now this is again a question which can come about who are the Gujjars, what kind of life they led. So you need to know these kind of details in order to be able to explain and give the details of what kind of life was there in that forest area. The Gujjars were junglis, so as Sibia was too, born and bred in the forest. For countless centuries, their forebears had lived like this, getting their living from animals, from grass and trees, as they scratched their food together and stored their substance in large herds and silver jewelry. They were man in the wandering pastoral age, not Stone Age hunters. They were not like those in the Stone Age, as you would have read in the chapter in biology, and not yet cultivators. So they were not fully cultivators, but they were not Stone Age hunters either. So they would kind of, as I said, they were essentially nomads who would move from place to place, living off their cattle, but they were not completely into this thing of cultivation, but they would kind of clear a bit of the forest area in order to settle down there. And now there was a river twinkling between the trees, sunlit beyond dark trunks. They could hear it rushing along. The women came out on the shore and made for the stepping stones. So here we pause. This is part 1 of the video of the story, the Blue Bead. We have till now, Norah Burke has given you a sense of life inside the forest. She has introduced the crocodile, she has introduced the Blue Bead, and she has introduced the main character called 12-year-old Sibia. And she's also given you a beautiful description of life inside the forest, the nomadic tribes called the Gujjar. So these are some of the descriptions that you need to remember by heart. So you would do well to actually underline the keywords so that you can use them in your answers, as I keep telling you all the time. In part 2, we would actually tackle the action which takes place inside the river, the clash between the crocodile and Sibia, and what happens as a result. So do see part 1 after you have finished with part 2 after you have finished with part 1, and we will see you in part 2 so that we can completely finish this chapter and also give you explanations of the different themes that are part of the story, The Blue Bead. Thank you very much for watching.